Hi everyone, my name is Andy Evansen. Are you ready to explore the fascinating world of watercolor? In this lesson, we're getting awfully close to the most interesting part, so I recommend you just sit tight and pay attention closely for the next. Okay, so I'm going to have a couple of brushes at the ready here. When I'm painting this, I'm going to go ahead and start in this side of the paper and just start connecting the big background shape of the trees. And I'm going to bring that down and paint around the light side of that little shed there, but the shadow side of the roof of that is middle value, so that's going to connect.
Andy, what color are you using now?
Oh, I'm sorry, this is just Payne's Gray.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is just for my value study. I use Payne's Gray paint for most of my value studies. And that's going to come down to this little shape. And by the way, my eyes are basically shut. I've got my reading glasses on and I'm squinting my eyes. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but when I need to see details, I can open them up, but I'm trying to block out detail and a lot of the color information. I'm just trying to see values and big, simple shapes. Okay, so I've got the light side of that little thing I'm going to paint around, but now the shadow side of it is connected. And it's going to help to define the light on the side of that barn. I can soften that edge a bit so it looks a little bit more round. Now, before I lose the tops of these trees, I'm going to take a little bit smaller brush and do some dry brushing up here. It's just a value study, so it's not that important. But again, part of the reason I like to paint these value studies is they serve as a nice warm up, and so I can practice some of this dry brushing. Okay, so I can do that, come in here. All right, now I need to, I'm going to put this little shadow under that barn roof, but now I need to be careful and paint around a large barn roof. Leave the little light up there on those cupolas. Again, just do some dry brushing at the top. Practice, practice. Paint around that little cupola, and they've got these shadows that they're casting right down, so that's going to be a connection down to the shadow side eventually. All those great possibilities for lost edges. That's what I'm trying to find here. All right, more trees back here. Now that's going to come down to find this back end of the rooftop, and now it's going to come in and connect with the shadow side of the roof. And that's going to come right down. Let's switch to that bigger brush again. That's going to come down and connect to the shadow side of the barn. And that's casting a shadow onto most of this little side shed here. There's a little bit of light, the sunlight catching the corner of it. But I keep reloading my brush from that big puddle of paint that I mixed earlier. That's going to cast a little angular shadow down here in middle value. I'm just leaving a little bit of sunlight on the top of that roof, but overall, it's all in shadow. And then that's going to help to define. Now I need to paint around the top of that roof that's in light. More dry brush practice. I don't necessarily like the fact that that tree line is all very similar in size. When I come back in, I can always drop in a darker, evergreen or something to break it up, that shape later on, but getting a little bit of variety would be nice. So in addition to actually painting, I love teaching painting. I started during the pandemic teaching online courses, and it allowed me to reach a much wider audience, which was very exciting for me, being able to share my knowledge with a wider group of people. And it's also more convenient for the students as well. They don't have all the travel expenses. You can just stay in your own home and study right there on your computer. So if you haven't studied with me yet, or if you feel like you want to continue learning, I'm sharing my favorite free workshop with you now. So you can sign up via the link on this video and get a taste for how I teach, and hopefully you find it interesting enough to continue on. Okay, so these trees are gonna come over and get a little bit shorter, and they're gonna help to define the light side of that silo. And it's gonna come down and connect right there into the shadow side of these buildings. And there's that little drop shadow under the roof there. And that's gonna help to define the light roof of this building. And that building's gonna come over here and connect into this little shadowy area there, into the dirt. That's all in shadow. This side of the silo is in shadow, and it's going to connect with more trees in the background behind it. Soften that up so it looks rounder. All right, now I need to connect all the dirt. That's also in middle value. And I've got that nice bead, because I'm reloading my brush often, a lot, I've got this nice bead at the bottom of this shape. So I can kind of do some of these smaller shapes, and when I come back, I can still grab that and start painting and find some more connections. So I didn't draw the shape of the dirt, like I said, that's not necessary. I'm just using my brush to make some interesting strokes to define that dirt. Now, it doesn't matter what shape that is. Going to leave a few little light spots for snow breaking in and out of the edge of that dirt. The cows are going to be darker, so I'm not worried about painting around them. Paint right through them if they're going to be darker. Maybe leave a little bit of a highlight for that side of that hay over there. And again, instead of making that separation between all of this, I'm going to go ahead and grab that bead and just connect that dirt down below here and widen this up a little bit for a better composition. Leave the viewer's eye up and in. I can do some smaller little shapes in the snow, all those little elegant marks you can make at the end. Okay, so one big descriptive shape. Already, if you showed that to somebody, even without the reference photograph, I think they'd be getting a sense of what that scene is that they're looking at, okay? But the main goal of this is so that when I'm doing this in color later, I can mix these kind of violets and browns and grays of the distant tree line, merge that with the blue shadow of the rooftop, merge that with the reddish shadow on the barn, merge that back over to the brown grays of the shadow side of this thing, the warm brown on the side of the silo, back into the browns of the pasture, this green little building over here, turquoisey color can merge right into it, okay? Where you're just getting all those beautiful kind of lost edges in your middle value shape. We can always come back in now with the darks, which we'll do in a minute, and find some of those darker details to bring some definition back. Does anybody have any questions on that before we move ahead?
Amazing, gorgeous, Andy. You are a master. Comments amazing already. Itself an artwork, looks gorgeous, lovely already. Oh, many compliments.
That's good to hear. Thank you. I appreciate all that.
Yeah.
All right. So now we can come in on top of this and find some of the important darks and pop this out a little bit more. So I'm going to get some of this water off of here. And I'm going to use a smaller brush, a little thicker paint. Now this hasn't dried yet. Normally I'd let it dry a little bit more, but I'm not doing a color version of this. So I'm just going to jump in and find some of these darker shapes. But I'm going to start by putting in a little bit of that darker evergreen one more time. And if that fuzzes a bit, that's fine because it's back there in the foliage. But I can use that to really start to pop out some of these forms of smaller things down here. Got someone peeking in the doorway trying to get in. Sorry, dude. All right, so I've got a little darker tree there. And even though I'm painting the dark details, I'm still gonna try and paint shapes. Going back to what I was saying on the critiques from the students, don't outline, okay? When it comes time to putting these shapes in, don't think lines, think shapes. Whenever you can, leave some of those lost edges remain on your painting. That's the whole point of finding them. Darken this up just a little bit up there. And go just a little bit darker down here. Yeah, it's starting to bleed a little bit, but that's okay. I've just got to be careful that I'm not going using too much water in this and getting balloons is all. Okay, so I need to darken up, I need to make the separation now between the light front of that barn, the shadow of the roof, and then this side is slightly darker. So if I was doing this in color, I would already have gone from this kind of blue of the barn to some kind of a red on the side. And then when it dries, I would come in with maybe, Payne's gray with alizarin crimson, just a slightly darker wash, and darken over this side of the barn to help separate it out a little bit from the rooftop. And we got a little darker doorway down in here. And that little shade can kind of continue down here too a bit. Get some definition. And let's see, we can darken up that eave a little bit, darken up this doorway some. I think that could be a little bit darker too. And then, of course, the stars of the show are little cows. So I'll come back in. I'm going to zoom in just a bit as I do the cows for you. And because I'm painting my value study, this becomes a nice little warm up for when I want to paint my cows on my painting. Give them a little shadow. And it's amazing what you can get away with some of these shapes. Don't worry about trying to make it look just like a cow. Okay, the more time you spend on it, I guarantee you the worse it's going to get. So just the fact that we've started off with kind of a farm scene with the barn, some of these little shapes that I'm putting in there, even though they don't look that much like cows, that's what the viewer is going to see. That's that whole aspect of not over rendering, not over detailing. You have to trust that the viewer's brain is going to fill in a lot of these empty gaps and just kind of simplified shapes in their mind's eye, and they're going to see, maybe they see horses if they live on, that's fine, it doesn't matter, as long as they see some grazing animals down here, that's the point. And we've got this little collection of them over here on the corner, feeding in that little thing. Okay, so that's, at the end, you come back in and find some of these nice little separations. But again, this is a dangerous stage. You don't want to overdo it. You start having fun with all these little darks and you just keep putting them in and putting them in. So at some point you have to just say enough is enough. I try to avoid putting too many little detailed darks on the boundaries of studies. In a nutshell, it's just trying to work through some of the issues because our brains want to see all the definition and detail in a scene, and it's really hard to see beyond that and find bigger, simpler shapes and connections. And I think this value study process really helps in that regard. Any questions?
Just compliments.
I'll take it.
It's a miracle, the transformation. Yes, there is one question. Can I use the cheap Canson paper for value studies?
That's tricky because, it's fine, but you're not going to get that nice connected wash as well because it's such a smooth paper. It doesn't take a wash very well, and it tends to create blooms and stuff. So yeah, you don't have to use your best paper, and it's up to you, but it's really tough to practice dry brushing and connecting shapes and stuff on cheaper paper. So there's inexpensive paper that's still good watercolor paper, and then there's bad inexpensive watercolor paper, and you have to kind of find that balance about what am I trying to learn from this? Am I learning anything from working on really bad paper?
I understand value studies for finding the forms, but does it help with colors too? Yeah,
for sure. So now when I'm going to do this in color, if I would redraw this scene, I'm going to zoom out again so you can see both. So if I was going to redo this in color now, I still use this value study to inform even on my light wash in color. I look at my value study and I say, why did I leave white paper here? What needs to be there on my first wash? And I'll put in that cerulean blue and pink sky. What needs to be here later when I paint around it and leave that shape behind? I need that pale blue of the top of the barn roof, so I'll paint that cobalt gray barn roof there. What needs to be in these little spots? Pretty much white paper for the sides of those little vents on the top of the barn roof, so I'll leave that white paper. What needs to be here later? Same thing, kind of that steely blue gray, so I'll put that there. What needs to be here? Brown and raw sienna, so I'll drop those colors down here. Same on the silo, kind of that raw sienna. So I'm looking at my value study, even as I'm doing that first wash, just saying what's going to be left behind in these areas later when I paint around them. So it does inform a lot of my decisions as I go to the color painting. And the nice thing about this too, once I have this value study, if you didn't know what the reference photograph was, I've got these big convincing shapes with no color involved whatsoever. I can just use this for a completely different painting and say I want to make it a summer day. So instead of just kind of a grayish blue sky, I can make it a little bit brighter blue with some clouds. Instead of leaving this white paper or tinting it slightly for snow, I can put green pasture in there. And a shadow, and I can intensify the colors on the buildings a little bit more. And then all of a sudden I've got a summer scene instead of a winter scene. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, the color choices you make are very personal. You don't have to be tied literally to that reference photograph, but it's still important. This speaks to the fact that I think shape and value is more important initially than color in making sure that it reads well, that composition. And then you have a lot of freedom to just, there's a lot of artists who paint with unrealistic colors, but their paintings still read very well because they're good shape makers and they understand value.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks a lot. It's super helpful.
Good. Okay, now we're going to go to the sheet, and I'm just going to do another little exercise here on connecting things in color. So I'm not going to do the whole painting, obviously, we don't have time for that, but I just want to focus in on ways to make sure that these sheep are going to be joined in right away from my first wash. Okay, so I'm looking at this, and again, if I had a value study of this, the white of the paper would be most of the sky, even though we've got some cloud shadows up there, obviously, that are darker. I don't tend to really put those into the value study. And overall, the sky is light. The sun is obviously low, striking these sheep on the side. So we've got a lot of light in the grass and the stone up here, the tops of some of these fence posts, and the tops of the sheep. Now, the grass needs to be a little bit darker. If the grass was going to be light, we wouldn't see our sheep. So and look at it compared to the white of the paper on the photograph here. So the grass, even though it's in sunlight, it's still middle value. So that's an important part I want to address too. I want to make sure you're clear on that. My value study, it's not just what's in sun and what's in shadow. Okay, it's still value. So the value of this grass, even though the sun is obviously on it, needs to be in the middle value so that it pops out my stone wall and these grasses, and especially the sheep. I hope that makes sense. All right, I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this so you can see everything, maybe more like this, and I'll zoom in a little bit more again. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of these sheep and the shapes around them. I'm not going to do all the sheep. I'm going to maybe focus mainly on this one here by the wall, and then I can put that dark one behind later on here. But so what I'm going to do real quickly here is just kind of sketch out their forms. Again, real quickly, I don't want to draw the sheep with too much detail yet. I'm just going to make sure they're going to fit, even though this is just a little exercise and it's not that big a deal, but I still want to try and make sure everything is going to fit on the page here. I've got grasses back there, that stone pillar, here's my stone wall, and the shapes of that stuff back there. Okay, so everything is going to fit on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and darken this up some. I don't need to darken up the grasses too much, but I want to make sure I'm seeing the forms of these sheep. Okay, getting rid of that one back there. We've got that fence, obviously, but don't need to worry too much about that. Just putting it in so I can get a sense of a good scale here. All right, onto this sheep over by the side. Sorry, I'll get to the painting soon here. I'm just trying to make sure everything is in a good spot. And then I've got this other, the black sheep in the background. I'll just change his form a little bit. Put that in there. Okay, so real simple on these forms. Again, kind of a contour, the outside of these shapes. All right. So what I would do if I was going to do this scene in color here now is my first wash, I would wet the paper unless I wanted something to be actually white, which in this case, we've got a couple spots, which I would leave white paper, but maybe the face of this sheep and a little bit of the back is a little bit brighter white, and a little bit on the legs of this sheep seem to be a little bit brighter white. But overall, their wool is has that kind of warm color to it. A little bit closer, similar to the grasses and the wall than white paper. So I would tint this whole area down here with some of that pale raw sienna and some grays in the wall and everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to wet the paper first. I'm working pretty small here. I don't need to, I don't think. But I'm just going to use a big brush. I'm going to get that raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna. Get some neutral tint up here for where the wall is and some other colors. A little variety going here. Maybe even a little cooler bluish grays. Okay, so again, my first wash now is going to be all this lighter grass, and it's going to include the foreground grass. Okay, I'm not going to leave that white paper because if I leave any gaps behind, I want to have some warmer little tufts of grass showing, not white paper. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just continue that down. All I'm going to paint around is if I actually want something to remain white paper. So I'm going to paint around maybe just a little bit of the face of that one, but overall, this sheep's wool is closer in value to the grass, as I said before. The point of this lesson here is to make sure when you have figures in your paintings, when you have vehicles, when you have animals, don't paint around them and leave them white holes that you're going to come back in and fill in later. Include them in that first wash right away. All right, so I've got these back legs of that sheep you're not seeing sunlight on them, they're in shadow, so I painted right through them. I painted around the light that are faced closer to us, those are catching the sunlight. So I'm painting around those, and I painted right through the darker ones. Don't paint around things that are going to be darker, paint right through them. Now I'm getting to this secondary sheep. Again, we've got some white paper that I might want to leave up there on the rump, and down here on the bottoms of these front leg or two. But overall, I want to connect that sheep into this shape as well. The back legs on that sheep are also darker than the background. So I'm going to paint around his head some. Paint around his back a little bit better there. There we go. I can leave a little bit of white up there and then get to some of this gray tones for rocks and things, whatever. Again, I'm not going to do this whole painting, but you get the idea. I just want to show you an exercise on how to connect these shapes into your first washes is all. Switch to some of this bluish color. Some of this back here is not all warm. Okay, so now my sheep, right from the very first wash, aren't separated, they're connected into this big shape. Now, as I talk my way through the middle value, It's going to be a little bit more of the same thing. I'm going to be painting the green grass, but I don't want to just completely surround these sheep. They're not all light, okay? When I zoom in on these sheep here, the neck and the lower parts down here are more of a middle value. The back legs and the belly are going to be much darker later. This shadow being cast on the side of this sheep and the back legs are all in middle value. It's just the sun, the sun hitting the front legs that are going to be light on that sheep. So that when I paint the green grass, I'm going to come right up and get more of this shadow shape and define that. And then I'll paint the green grass above and around it in the background to show the back a little bit better. I'll still be painting through that darker brown sheep for now. Okay, so now I'm going to mix my middle value. Got the green of the grass. I'm just mixing some quinacridone gold, burnt sienna, and cerulean blue for that green. So I've got that. I want to get a little bit deeper brown for the front of that sheep. When I'm going to merge that in, some of those shadows on his chest. Make sure that that's going to be connected. We've got kind of that more of a bluish gray shadow on the other sheep again. So I want to go a little bit darker with that. And just have a couple of different varieties of colors ready to go here. But this is important. This is why I find that big connected middle value shape. So that when I paint this, I'm losing edges, joining things together. You can always come back in with darks later and find the separations. All righty, I'm gonna go ahead and start with my grass. So now I can paint around and leave the bottom of that warmer grass. I'm gonna paint around his head one more time. But the reason I left, right, that I didn't leave that white paper when I'm painting my grass now is say I'm going to do some quicker brush strokes down here and leave some light grasses behind. Now they're the tan color of the rest of the grass and not white paper. Okay, so that leg back there is going to be darker later, so I'm going to paint right through it. Paint around things that are going to be darker. I'm sorry, paint through things that are going to be darker, paint around things that are going to remain lighter. Hard to talk and paint at the same time. Okay. So before I go too far with this, and I'm going to paint around that back leg again, I want to start connecting that sheep, the shadow of that sheep a little bit and make sure that it's staying in with this wash. So I'm going to grab that smaller brush, grab that color and start. I just want to lose that edge. Get a little bit of that wool coming up here. A bit better. And again, so he was connected from the light wash. Now he's connected still even more from the middle value wash. Got a nice lost edge there. Back to the green. Come over here. Just going to paint through that darker one in the background. Got the distant pasture grasses back here. Okay, now when I get to this sheep again, the middle value that you're seeing on his back legs is kind of that bluish gray. I'm just going to switch to that color and start merging that shadow shape in with this a bit more. That nice cast shadow under his chin. Leaving the front legs lighter. So that sheep is really connected in with the surroundings. Two beautiful lost edges. I'm gonna put a little bit of light brown on the light side of that sheep. Now I can paint around that stone pillar a bit behind him. At least the light part of it. But the shadow side of that stone pillar be connected in and help to define this side of the sheep. Right there, another lost edge. Back to grasses back here again. All right. So connections, connections, connections all over the place. And there's many more in this scene. Obviously, I'm just focusing on a few of the small sheep for now, but if I wanted to connect this up into the stone wall, I could do some of those a little bit more middle value grasses and make sure I'm getting a nice lost edge there too. Quick little brush strokes, start to show individual stones. I can come back and do some more of that later with darks. But again, I want to focus in on how important it is, the fact that now my sheep, I didn't surround them and leave a white hole on my painting just because my brain's telling me that there's white sheep, but I'm going to come back and fill in later. They're connected into their surroundings. They're part of this big middle value shape. I've got some nice lost edges that I'm going to try and leave be, and I can still come back in now with darks and make some more separations and definition. So one more time, I'm just going to hit this with the hair dryer. Okay, so I've got some nice soft lost edges. Now it's time to bring it all home and find some connections, or I'm sorry, some definitions with our darks. Okay, so now I can come in. I said before I painted through those back legs of the sheep over there, painted through those back legs. We're not going to see these two back legs until I paint that dark grass at the bottom of the fence around them. So I'm going to negatively paint around those back legs and kind of carve them out of that middle value shape. This sheep will pop out a lot more when I paint that dark belly, the two back legs, and give them a shadow down onto the grass. The back of this sheep will pop a little bit more when I put that warm brown sheep in the background, and even fencing and all that small stuff. So don't worry about the small stuff until you get to the point where you're putting in details. Always make sure the big problems are working first. Okay, so now I can come in, paint this underbelly of that sheep and that back leg coming down. And I can paint that leg shape right there, the front of that, and an ear, a little bit of that leg coming down there. Give them a little cast shadow onto the ground. And that sheep kind of just pops out from everything else. Still important to leave a couple of those lost edges, even if they're small. I don't want to ruin all that work I did before to find some nice connections and lost edges. So now I need to make that sheep pop out, get that darker green under the fence there. We're going to negatively paint around the two back legs, like I said, to make sure that now they're standing out a little bit. Got that coming down. Get between those two back legs. And now they show up, but they're in that shadow shape now. They're connected. And the front legs one more time, painting around them. And popping the front end out a little bit better here with some more darker green grasses. All right, so now that sheep is a lot more visible than he was before. He's got a couple little darker shapes up by his ears and things. Smaller shapes underneath his chin. Don't really need eyes on him, that's distracting. All right. And the fencing above. And then the little dark brown sheep behind him is going to help to pop his rump out a little bit better. Changing the shape of that sheep so that he's grazing a little bit better. Give that guy a shadow too. Okay, so that's the idea. That's the whole point of doing the value studies. From that one big middle value puddle that I do on the value studies, it paints gray. Now when I'm doing it in color, I paint that same shape, only now on my palette, I've got green and brown and blue gray and stuff, and I just change the color of my brush once in a while. But I'm still thinking in terms of finding those connections and not the separations. That make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
You make it seem so simple.
Nothing simple, I know, but that's what I was saying before. It's at least it's something, even if you can't do it, I want it to be a process that you can understand and practice. It's going to take a lot of practice. It's not as easy as it looks up here. I've been doing this for, you know, a long time, and so I can see these things much more readily, but we've been spending our whole lives kind of worrying about details, and now to kind of come back and not worry about them is really difficult. But I think if you, especially when you're trying to loosen up on your paintings a little bit, if you can focus on the big shapes, make sure those are working first and foremost, and then using those smaller detail shapes, not to save your painting, but to add to it and add a little bit of definition and refinement. But those big shapes, like I was saying before, those are the ones that people see, you know, from across the room, from a distance. It's important to make sure that those things are all working first.
Absolutely. The main aim of this exercise was to show how to simplify and how to use value study and how to use this knowledge, which we get from the value study in the.
Gotta find that shape first somehow, some way, so you can mix in big puddles, grab big brushes, then you come back and find those shapes afterwards, you know, to make it appear a little bit more realistic. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If you found it helpful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel using the link in the video here, and continue immersing yourself in the wonderful world of art. In addition to myself, there are many talented instructors on the YouTube channel here through Artefacto. So I hope you enjoy.